Okay, so this is a reading of the Analects by Confucius. This is in the Readings in Classical Chinese Philosophy. So I was originally gonna just read book one, but being as they're all really short and there are like 20 of them, I'm pretty sure I can do it within like the same time as I did the Prometheus and Manifesto. So Prometheus Manifesto. So yeah. Introduction. The Analectics purports to be a record of the teachings of Kongzi or Confucius and his disciples. Kongzi believed that the golden age of humankind had been realized during the height of the Zhao dynasty from 1045 to 771 BCE, the so-called Western Zhou period. Personified by the cultural heroes King Wen, his son King Wu, and the virtuous regent, the Duke of Zhou, the early Zhou rulers established and maintained a special relationship with the Tian heaven by properly and sincerely observing a set of sacred practices collectively referred to as the Li, rites or rituals. The scope of the rites was quite vast, including everything from grand state ceremonies to the proper way to sit or fasten one's lapel. Details that we might think of as issues of etiquette. In return for such formal obedience to heaven in all matters, great and small, the Zhou royal line was rewarded with the Ming mandate to rule China, manifested in the form of a charismatic day, virtue, or power. By Kongzi's age, the Zhou kings had been reduced to mere figureheads, and real political power was in the hands of various local rulers. In Kongzi's eyes, the scholars of his day, those who should properly be motivated by a love for learning and a devotion to the culture of the Zhou, were interested only in self-aggrandizement and sensuous pleasures, and the people thereby, bereft of moral leadership and grown unruly, could only be controlled through strict laws and harsh punishments. Despite the bleakness of this world, Kongzi believed that there was still hope for humanity, because the traditional Zhou ritual forms and written classics, which had been carefully preserved by a small group of cultural specialists, the Ru erudites, could serve as a sort of blueprint for rebuilding the lost golden age. Kongzi thus dedicated his life to both transmitting these cultural forms to his contemporaries and striving to embody them in his own person, hoping in this way to lead his fallen world back to the Tao way of heaven. Involving lifelong and sincere devotion to traditional cultural forms, Kongzi's way to culminate eventually in a kind of intuitive mastery of those forms, and one who has attained the state of consummate mastery. The Junzi gentleman is said to possess the supreme virtue of Ren, goodness, originally referring to the strong and handsome appearance of a noble warrior. Ren designates for Kongzi the quality of the perfectly realized person, one who has so completely mastered the way that it has become a sort of second nature. Such a state of spiritual perfection is referred to as Wu Wei, effortless action or non-action, a state of spontaneous harmony between individual inclinations and the sacred way of heaven. Through the power of virtue accruing to one so perfectly in harmony with heaven, the state of individual perfection is to lead to the spontaneous and effortless ordering of the entire world. There will be no need for raising armies, instituting laws, or issuing governmental decrees, for the entire world will be as inexorably drawn to a ruler with true virtue as the heavenly bodies are bound to their proper circuits in the sky. Book 1. The master said, "To learn and then have occasion to practice what you have learned, is this not satisfying? To have friends arrive from afar, is this not joy? To be patient even when others do not understand, is this not the mark of the gentleman?" Master Yu said, "As a young person who is filial and respectful of his elders rarely becomes the kind of person who is inclined to defy his superiors, and there has never been a case of one who is disinclined to defy his superiors, stirring up rebellion. The gentleman applies himself to the roots. Once the roots are firmly established, the way will grow. Might we not say that filial piety and respect for elders constitute the root of goodness?" The master said, "A clever tongue and fine appearance are rarely signs of goodness." Master Zhang said, "Every day I examine myself on 3 counts. In my dealings with others, have I in any way failed to be dutiful? In my interactions with friends and associates, have I in any way failed to be trustworthy? Finally, have I in any way failed to put into practice what I teach?" The master said, "A young man should be filial when at home and respectful of his elders when in public. Conscientious and trustworthy, he should display a general care for the masses, but feel a particular affection for those who are good. If he has any strength left over after manifesting these virtues in practice, let him then devote it to learning the cultural arts." Master Zhang said, "Take great care in seeing of the deceased and sedulously maintain the sacrifices to distant ancestors, and the common people will sincerely return to virtue." Ziqin said, asked Zigong, "When our master arrives in a state, he invariably finds out about its government. Does he actively seek out this information? Surely it is not simply offered to him." Zigong answered, "Our master obtains it through being courteous, refined, respectful, restrained, and deferential. The master's way of seeking it is entirely different from other people's way of seeking it, is it not?" The master said, "When someone's father is still alive, observe his intentions. After his father has passed away, observe his conduct. If for 3 years he does not alter the ways of his father, he may be called a filial son." Master Yu said, "When it comes to the practice of ritual, it is harmonious ease that is to be valued. It is precisely such harmony that makes the way of the former king so beautiful. If you merely stick rigidly to ritual in all matters, great and small, there will remain that which you cannot accomplish. Yet if you know enough to value harmonious ease, but try to attain it without being regulated by the rites, this will not work either." Zigong said, "Poor within, being obsequious, rich without, being arrogant. What would you say about something like that?" The master answered, "That is acceptable, but it is still not as good as being poor and yet joyful, rich and yet loving ritual." Zigong asked, "An ode says, as if cut, as if polished, as if carved, as if ground. Is this not what you have in mind?" The master said, "Zigong, you are precisely the kind of person with whom one can begin to discuss the odes. Informed as to what has gone before, you know what is to come." Book 2. The master said, "One who rules through the power of virtue is analogous to the pole star. It simply remains in its place and receives the homage of the myriad lesser stars." The master said, "The odes number several hundred and yet can be judged with a single phrase. Oh, they will not lead you astray." Master said, "If you try to guide the common people with coercive regulations and keep them in line with punishments, the common people will become evasive and will have no sense of shame. If, however, you guide them with virtue and keep them in line by means of ritual, the people will have a sense of shame and will rectify themselves." The master said, "At 15, I set my mind upon learning. At 30, I took my place in society. At 40, I became free of doubts. At 50, I understood heaven's mandate. At 60, my ear was attuned, and at 70, I could follow my heart's desires without overstepping the bounds of propriety." Ziyo asked about filial piety. The master said, "Nowadays, filial means simply being able to provide one's parents with nourishment. But even dogs and horses are provided with nourishment. If you are not respectful, wherein lies the difference?" Zixia asked about filial piety. The master said, "It is the demeanor that is difficult. If there is work to be done, young people should understand the burden, and when wine and food are served, elders are given precedence. But surely filial piety consists of more than this." The master said, "I can talk all day long with Yan Hui, without him once disagreeing with me in this way. He seems a bit stupid, and yet, when we retire and observe his private behavior, I see that it is in fact worthy to serve as an illustration of what I have taught. Hui is not stupid at all." The master said, "Look at the means a man employs, observe the basis from which he acts, and discover where it is that he feels at ease. Where can he hide? Where can he hide?" The master said, "Both keeping past teachings alive and understanding the present, someone able to do this is worthy of being a teacher." The master said, "The gentleman is not a vessel." The master said, "If you learn without thinking about what you have learned, you will be lost. If you think without learning, however, you will fall into danger." Duke Ai asked, "What can I do to induce the common people to be obedient?" Kongzi replied, "Raise up the straight and apply them to the crooked, and the people will submit to you. If you raise up the crooked and apply them to the straight, the people will never submit." Some people said of Kongzi, "Why is it that he is not participating in government?" Upon being informed of this, the master remarked, "The history says, filial also filial, friendly to one's elders and juniors, in this way exerting an influence upon those who govern. Thus, in being a filial son and good brother, one is already taking part in government. What need is there then to speak of participating in government?" Book 3. Kongzi said of the Ji family, "They have 8 rows of dancers performing in their courtyard. If they can condone this, what are they not capable of?" The master said, "A man who is not good, what has he to do with a ritual? A man who is not good, what has he to do with music?" Lin Fang asked about the roots of ritual. The master exclaimed, "What a noble question! When it comes to ritual, it is better to be spare than extravagant. When it comes to mourning, it is better to be excessively sorrowful than fastidious." Zixia asked, "The odes say, her artful smile, with its alluring dimples, her beautiful eyes so clear, the adorned upon which to paint. What does this mean?" The master said, "The application of colors comes only after a suitable unadorned background is present." Zixia said, "So it is the rites that come after?" The master said, "It is you, Zixia, who has awakened me to the meaning of these lines. It is only with someone like you that I can begin to discuss the odes." Someone asked for an explanation of the de-sacrifice. The master said, "I do not understand it. One who understood it could hand to the world as if he had it right here," and he pointed to the palm of his hand. "Sacrifice as if they were present means that when sacrificing to the spirits, you should comport yourself as if the spirits were present." The master said, "If I am not fully present at the sacrifice, it is as if I did not sacrifice at all." The master said, "The Zhao gazes down upon the 2 dynasties that precede it. How brilliant in culture it is. I follow the Zhao." Zigong asked to do away with the practice of sacrificing a lamb to announce the beginning of the month. The master said, "Zigong, you regret the loss of the lamb, whereas I regret the loss of the right." The master said, "If in serving your lord you are careful to observe every detail of ritual propriety, people will wrongfully think you obsequious." Duke Ding asked, "How should a lord employ his ministers? How should a minister serve his lord?" Kongzi replied, "A lord should employ his ministers with ritual, and ministers should serve their lord with dutifulness." Master said, "The cry of the osprey expresses joy without becoming licentious, and expresses sorrow without falling into excessive pathos." The master was discussing music with the grand music master of Lu. He said, "What can be known about music is this. When it first begins, it resounds with a confusing variety of notes. But as it unfolds, these notes are reconciled by means of harmony, brought into tension by means of counterpoint, and finally woven together into a seamless whole. It is in this way that music reaches its perfection." A border official from the town of Yi requested an audience with the master, saying, "I have never failed to obtain an audience with a gentleman who have passed this way." Kongzi's followers thereupon presented him. After emerging from the audience, the border official remarked, "You disciples, why should you be concerned about your master's loss of office? The world has been without the way for a long time now, and heaven intends to use your master like the wooden clapper for a bell." Book 4. The master said, "To live in the neighborhood of the good is fine. If one does not choose to dwell among those who are good, how will one obtain wisdom?" The master said, "Without goodness one cannot remain constant in adversity and cannot enjoy enduring happiness. Those who are good feel at home in goodness, whereas those who are wise follow goodness because they feel that they will profit from it." The master said, "Only one who is good is able to truly love others or despise others." The master said, "Merely set your heart sincerely upon goodness, and you will be free of bad intentions." The master said, "Wealth and social eminence are things that are all people desire, and yet, unless they are acquired in the proper way, I will not abide them. Poverty and disgrace are things that all people hate, and yet, unless they are avoided in the proper way, I will not despise them. If the gentleman abandons goodness, how can he merit the name? The gentleman does not go against goodness, even for the amount of time required to finish a meal, even in times of urgency or distress. He necessarily accords with it." The master said, "I have yet to meet a person who truly loved goodness, or hated a lack of goodness. One who truly loved goodness could not be surpassed, while one who truly hated a lack of goodness would at least be able to act in a good fashion, insofar as he would not tolerate that which is not good being associated with his person. There is a person who can, for the space of a single day, simply devote his efforts to goodness. I have never met any one whose strength was insufficient for this task. Perhaps such a person exists, but I have yet to meet him." The master said, "People are true to type with regard to what sort of mistakes they make. Observe closely the sort of mistakes a person makes, then you will know his character." The master said, "Having in the morning heard the way was being put into practice, one could die that evening without regret." The master said, "A scholar who has set his heart upon the way, but who is still ashamed of having shabby clothing or meager rations, is not worth engaging in discussion." The master said, "With regard to the world, the gentleman has no predispositions for or against any person. He merely seeks to be on the side of those he considers right." The master said, "If in your affairs you abandon yourself to the pursuit of profit, you will arouse much resentment." The master said, "If a person is able to govern the state by means of ritual propriety and deference, what difficulties will he encounter? If on 412, the other hand, a person is not able to govern the If, on the other hand, a person is not able to govern the state through ritual propriety and deference, what use are the rights to him?" The master said, "Do not be concerned that you lack an official position, but rather concern yourself with the means by which you might become established. Do not be concerned that no one has heard of you, but rather strive to become a person worthy of being known." The master said, "Zhang, all that I teach can be strung together on a single thread." "Yes, sir," Master Zhang responded. After the master left, the disciples asked, "What did he mean by that?" Master Zhang said, "All that the master teaches amounts to nothing more than dutifulness, zhang, tempered by sympathetic understanding, shu." The master said, "The gentleman understands rightness, whereas the petty person understands profit." The master said, "When you see someone who is worthy, concentrate upon becoming their equal. When you see someone who is unworthy, use this as an opportunity to look within yourself." The master said, "In serving your parents, you may gently remonstrate with them. However, once it becomes apparent that they have not taken your criticism to heart, you should be respectful and not oppose them, and follow their lead diligently without resentment." The master said, "While your parents are alive, you should not travel far, and when you do travel, you must keep to a fixed itinerary." The master said, "One who makes no changes to the ways of his father for 3 years, after his father has passed away, may be called a filial son." The master said, "You must always be aware of the age of your parents. On the other hand, it is a cause for rejoicing, on the other, for a source of anxiety." The master said, "People in ancient times were not eager to speak because they would be ashamed if their actions did not measure up to their words." The master said, "Very few go astray who comport themselves with constraint." The master said, "The gentleman wishes to be slow to speak but quick to act." The master said, "Virtue is neither solitary, it always has neighbors." The master said of Gong Yi Cheng, "He is marriageable, although he was once imprisoned as a criminal. He was in fact innocent of any crime." The master gave him his daughter in marriage. Zigong asked, "What do you think of me?" The master replied, "You are a vessel." "What sort of vessel?" "A precious vessel." Meng Wubo asked, "Is Zilu good?" The master replied, "I do not know." Meng Wubo repeated his question. The master said, "In a state of 1,000 chariots, Zilu could be employed to organize the collection of military taxes, but I do not know whether or not he is good. What about Ronq? In a town of 1,000 households, or an aristocratic family of 100 chariots, Ronq could be employed as a steward, but I do not know whether or not he is good. What about Zihua? Standing in his proper place at court with the sash tied, Zihua could be employed to converse with guests and visitors, but I do not know whether or not he is good. The master said to Zigong, "Who is better, you or Yan Hui?" Zigong answered, "How dare I even think of comparing myself to Hui? Hui learns one thing and thereby understands 10. I learn one thing and thereby understand 2. The master said, "No, you are not as good as Hui. Neither one of us is as good as Hui." Zai Wo was sleeping during the daytime. The master said, "Rotten wood cannot be carved, and a wall of dung cannot be plastered. As for Zai Wo, what would be the use of reprimanding him?" The master added, "At first, when evaluating people, I would listen to their words and then simply trust that the corresponding conduct would follow. Now, when I evaluate people, I listen to their words, but then closely observe their conduct. It is my experience with Zai Wo that has brought about this change." Zigong said, What I do not wish others to do unto me, I also wish not to do unto others." The master said, "Ah, Zigong, that is something quite beyond you." Zigong said, "The master's cultural brilliance is something that is readily heard about, whereas one does not get to hear the master expounding upon the subjects of human nature or the way of heaven." Zi Zhang said, "The Prime Minister Zi Wen has given 3 times the post of Prime Minister, and yet he never showed a sign of pleasure. He was removed from his office 3 times and yet never showed a sign of resentment. When the incoming Prime Minister took over, he invariably provided him with a complete account of the official state of affairs. What do you make of Prime Minister Zi Wen?" The master said, "He certainly was dutiful. Was he not good? I do not know about that. What makes you think he deserves to be called good? When Kui Zi assassinated the Lord of Qi, when Chen Wenzi, whose estate mounted to 10 teams of horses, abandoned all that he possessed and left the state. Upon reaching another state, he said, 'The officials here are as bad as our great officer Kui Zi,' and thereupon left that state. After going to another state, he said, 'The officials here are as bad as our great officer Kui Zi,' thereupon left that state as well. What do you make of Chen Wenzi?" Master said, "He certainly was pure. Was he not good? I do not know about that. What makes you think he deserves to be called good?" When the master was in the state of Chen, he sighed, "Oh, let us go home. Let us go home. Our young followers back in Lu are wild and ambitious. They put on a great show of brilliant culture, but they lack the means to prune and shape it." Yan Hui and Zilu were in attendance. The master said to them, "Why do you not each speak to me of your aspirations?" Zilu answered, "I would like to be able to share my carts and horses, clothing and fur with my friends and associates without feeling regret." Yan Hui answered, "I would like to avoid being boastful about my own abilities, or exaggerating my accomplishments." Zilu then said, "I would like to hear of the master's aspirations." The master said, "To bring comfort to the aged, to inspire trust in my friends, and be cherished by the youth." The master said, "I should just give up. I have yet to meet someone who is able to perceive his own faults, and then take himself to task inwardly." The master said, "In any village of 10 households, there are surely those who are dutiful or trustworthy as I am, but there is no one who matches my love for learning." Book 6. Duke Ai asked, "Who among your disciples might be said to love learning?" Kongzi answered, "There was one named Yan Hui who loved learning. He never misdirected his anger, and never made the same mistake twice. Unfortunately, his allotted lifespan was short, and he has passed away. Now that he is gone, there are none who really love learning, at least as I have yet to hear of one. When Yuan Si was serving as steward, he was offered a salary of 900 measures of millet, but he declined it. The master said, 'Do not decline it. If you do not need it yourself, could you not use it to aid the households in your neighborhood? The master said, Yan Hui, for 3 months at a time his heart did not stray from goodness. The rest could only sporadically maintain such a state. Bon Yu fell ill, and the master went to ask after his health. Grasping his hand through the window, the master sighed, "That we are going to lose him must be due to fate. How else could such a man be afflicted with such an illness, and be left with nothing we can do? How else could such a man be afflicted with such an illness?" The master said, "What a worthy man was Yan Hui, living in a narrow alley, subsisting upon a basket of grain and gourd full of water. Other people could not have borne such hardship, yet it never spoiled Hui's joy. What a worthy man was Hui." Ron Qiu said, "It is not that I do not delight in your way, master. It is simply that my strength is insufficient." The master said, "Someone whose strength is genuinely insufficient collapses somewhere along the way. As for you, you deliberately draw the line." The master said to Zi Xia, "Be a gentlemanly Ru, do not be a petty Ru." The master said, "Who is able to leave a room without going out through the door? How is it then that one follows this way? How is it then that no one follows this way?" The master said, "When native substance overwhelms cultural refinement, the result is a crude rustic. When cultural refinement overwhelms native substance, the result is a foppish pedant. Only when culture and native substance are perfectly mixed and balanced do you have a gentleman." The master said, "One who knows it is not the equal of one who loves it, and one who loves it is not the equal of one who takes joy in it." The master said, "You can discuss the loftiest matters with those who are above average, but not with those who are below average." Fan Qi asked about wisdom. The master said, "Working to ensure social harmony among the common people, respecting the ghosts and spirits while keeping them at a distance. This might be called wisdom." Then he asked about goodness. The master said, "One who is good sees as his first priority the hardship of self-cultivation, and only after thinks about results or rewards. Yes, this is what we might call goodness." The master said, "The wise take joy in rivers, while the good take joy in mountains. The wise are active while the good are still. The wise are joyful while the good are long-lived." The master said, "A gu that is not a proper gu. Is it really a gu? Is it really a gu?" The master said, "Someone who is broadly learned with regard to culture, and whose conduct is restrained by rights, can be counted upon to not go astray." The master had an audience with Nan-zi, and Zilu was not pleased. The master swore an oath, saying, "If I have done anything wrong, may heaven punish me. May heaven punish me." The master said, "Acquiring virtue by applying the mean, is this not best? And yet among the common people, few are able to practice this for long." Zigong said, "If there were one able to bestow much upon the common people and bring succor to the multitudes, what would you make of him? Could such a person be called good?" The master said, "Why stop at good? Such a person should surely be called a sage. Even someone like Yao or Shun would find such a task daunting. Desiring to take his stand, one who is good helps others to take their stand. Wanting to realize himself, he helps others to realize themselves. Being able to take what is near at hand as an analogy could perhaps be called the method of goodness." Book 7. The master said, "I transmit rather than innovate. I trust in and love the ancient ways. I might thus humbly compare myself to old Pang." The master said, remaining silent and yet comprehending, learning and yet never becoming tired, encouraging others and never growing weary. These are tasks that present me with no difficulty. The master said that I fail to cultivate virtue, that I fail to inquire more deeply into that which I have learned, and that upon hearing what is right, I remain unable to move myself to do it, and that I prove unable to reform when I have done something wrong. Such potential failings are a source of constant worry to me." In his leisure moments, the master was composed and yet fully at ease. The master said, "How seriously I have declined It has been so long since I last dreamt of meeting the Duke of Zhou. Duke of Zhao. The master said, "Set your heart upon the way, rely upon virtue, lean upon goodness, and explore widely in your cultivation of the arts." The master said, "I have never denied instruction to anyone who, of their own accord, offered up as little as a bundle of silk or a bit of cured meat." The master said, "I will not open the door for a mind that is not already striving to understand, nor will I provide words to a tongue that is not already struggling to speak. If I hold up one corner of a problem and the student cannot come back to me with the other three, I will not attempt to instruct him again." When the master dined in the company of one who was in mourning, he never ate his fill. The master said, "If wealth were something worth pursuing, then I would pursue it, even if that meant serving as an officer holding a whip at the entrance to the marketplace, since it is not worth pursuing. However, I prefer to follow that which I love." When the master was in the state of Qi, he heard the Xiao music, and for 3 months after did not even notice the taste of meat. He said, "I never imagined that music would be so sublime." The master said, "Eating plain food and drinking water, having only your bent arm as a pillow, certainly there is joy to be found in this. Wealth and eminence attained improperly concern me no more than the floating clouds." The master said, "If I were granted many more years and could devote 50 of them to learning, surely I would be able to be free of major faults." The master used the classical pronunciation when reciting odes and the history, and when conducting ritual. In all these cases, he used the classical pronunciation. The Duke of Shi asked Zilu about Kongzi. Zilu had no reply. Upon Zilu's return, the master said, "Why did you not just say, 'He is the type of person who is so passionate that he forgets to eat, whose joy renders him free of worries, and who grows old without noticing the passage of the years?'" The master said, "I am not someone who was born with knowledge. I simply love antiquity, and diligently look there for knowledge." The master said, "When walking with 2 other people, I will always find a teacher among them. I focus on those who are good and seek to emulate them, and focus on those who are bad in order to be reminded of what needs to be changed in myself." The master said, "It is heaven itself that has endowed me with virtue. What have I to fear from the likes of Huan Tui?" The master said, "Do you disciples imagine that I am being secretive? I hide nothing from you. I take no action. I make no move without sharing it with you. This is the kind of person that I am." The master said, "No doubt there are those who try to innovate without acquiring knowledge, but this is a fault that I do not possess. I listen widely and then pick out that which is excellent in order to follow it. I see many things and then remember them. This constitutes a second best sort of knowledge." The master said, "Is goodness really so far away? If I simply desire goodness, I will find that it is already here." Whenever the master was singing in a group and heard something that he liked, he inevitably asked to have it sung again, and only then would harmonize with it. The master said, "There is no one who is my equal when it comes to cultural refinement. But as for actually becoming a gentleman in practice, this is something that I have not yet been able to achieve." The master said, "How could I dare to lay claim to either sageliness or goodness? What can be said about me is no more than this: I work at it without growing tired, and encourage others without growing weary." Gong Shihua observed, "This is precisely what we disciples are unable to learn." The master was seriously ill. Zilu asked permission to offer a prayer. The master said, "Is such a thing done?" Zilu asked, "It is. The eulogy reads, 'We pray for you above and below, to the spirits of heaven and of earth.'" The master said, "In that case, I have already been offering up my prayers for some time now." The master said, "The gentleman is self-possessed and relaxed, while the petty man is perpetually full of worry." The master was affable yet firm, awe-inspiring without being severe, simultaneously respectful and relaxed. And the master said, "If you are respectful but lack ritual, you'll become exasperating. If you are careful but lack ritual, you'll become timid. If you are courageous but lack ritual, you'll become unruly. And if you are upright but lack ritual, you will become inflexible. If the gentleman is kind to his relatives, the common people will be inspired toward goodness. If he does not neglect his old acquaintances, the people will honor their obligations to others. Master Zhang said, a scholar official must be strong and resolute, for his burden is heavy and his way Tao is long. He takes up goodness as his own personal burden. Is not this heavy? Is it not heavy? His way ends only with death. Is it not long? The master said, find inspiration in the odes, take your place through ritual, and achieve perfection with music. The master said, the common people can be made to follow it, but they cannot be made to understand it. The master said, it is not easy to find someone who is able to learn for even the space of 3 years without a thought given to official salary. The master said, be sincerely trustworthy and love learning, and hold fast to the good way until death. Do not enter a state that is endangered, and do not reside in a state that is disordered. If the way is being realized in the world, then show yourself. If it is not, then go into reclusion. In a state that has the way, to be poor and of low status is a cause for shame. In a state that is without the way, to be wealthy and honored is equally a cause for shame. The master said, how great was Yao as a ruler. So majestic, it is heaven that is great, and it was Yao who modeled himself upon it. So vast among the common people, there were none who were able to find words to describe him. How majestic in his accomplishments and glorious in cultural splendor. Book 9. A villager from Da Xiang remarked sarcastically, how great is Kongzi? He is so broadly learned, and yet has failed to make a name for himself in any particular endeavor. When the master was told of this, he said to his disciples, what art, then, should I take up? Charioteering? Archery? I think I shall take up charioteering. The master said, a ceremonial cap made of linen is prescribed by the rites, but these days people use silk. This is frugal, and I follow the majority. To bow before ascending the stairs is what is prescribed by the rites, but these days people bow after ascending. This is arrogant, and though it goes against the majority, I continue to bow before ascending. The master was surrounded in Kuang. He said, now that King Wen is gone, is not culture, when, now invested here in me? If heaven intended this culture to perish, it would not have given it to those of us who live after King Wen's death. Since heaven did not intend that this culture should perish, what can the people of Kuang do to me? The Prime Minister asked Zigong, your master is a sage, is he not? How is it then that he is skilled at so many menial tasks? Zigong replied, surely heaven not only not intends him for sagehood, but also gave him many other talents. When the master heard of this, he remarked, how well the Prime Minister knows me. In my youth I was of humble status, so I became proficient in many menial tasks. Is the gentleman broadly skilled in trivial matters? No, he is not. Whenever the master saw someone who was wearing mourning clothes, was garbed in full official dress, or was blind, he would always rise to his feet, even if the person was his junior. When passing such a person, he would always hasten his step. With a great sigh, Yan Hui lamented, the more I look up at it, the higher it seems. The more I delve into it, the harder it becomes. Catching a glimpse of it before me, I then find it suddenly at my back. The master is skilled at gradually leading me on. Step by step, he broadens me with culture and restrains me with the rites, so that even if I wanted to give up, I could not. Having exhausted all of my strength, it seems as if there is still something left. Looming up ahead of me, though I desire to follow it, there seems to be no way through. The master was gravely ill, and Zilu instructed his fellow disciples to attend Kongzi as if they were his ministers. During a remission in his illness, the master became aware of what was happening and rebuked Zilu, saying, it has been quite some time now has it not, that you have been carrying out this charade? If I have no ministers, and yet you act as if I have, who do you think I am going to fool? Am I going to fool heaven? Moreover, would I not rather die in the arms of a few of my disciples than in the arms of ministers? Even if I do not merit a grand funeral, it is not as if I would be left to die by the side of the road." Zigong said, "If you possess a piece of beautiful jade, would you hide it away in a lockbox, or would you try to sell it at a good price?" The master responded, "Oh, I would sell it. I am just waiting for the right offer." The master expressed his desire to go and live among the 9 Yi barbarian tribes. Someone asked him, "How could you bear their uncouthness?" The master replied, "If a gentleman were to dwell among them, what uncouthness would there be?" Standing on the bank of a river, the master said, "It passes on like this, does it not? Never stopping day or night." The master said, "I have yet to meet a man who loves virtue as much as he loves sex." The master said, "The task of self-cultivation might be compared to the task of building up a mountain. If I stop even one basketful of each short of completion, then I have stopped completely. It might also be compared to the task of leveling ground. If I have only dumped a single basket full of earth, at least I am moving forward." The master said, "Surely there are some sprouts that fail to flower, just as surely as there are some flowers that fail to bear fruit." The master said, "We should look upon the younger generation with awe, because how are we to know that those who come after us will not prove our equals? Once, however, a man reaches the age of 40 or 50 without having learned anything, he can conclude that from this fact alone that he is not worthy of being held in awe." The master said, "When a man is rebuked with exemplary words after having made a mistake, he cannot help but agree with them. However, what is important is that he change himself in order to accord with them. When a man is praised with words of respect, he cannot help but be pleased with them. However, what is important is that he actually lived up to them. A person who finds respectful words pleasing does not live up to them, or agrees with others' reproaches and yet does not change. There is nothing I can do with one such as this." The master said, "Only after winter comes do we know that the pine and cypress are the last to fade." The master said, "The wise are not confused, the good do not worry, and the courageous do not fear." Book 10. At court, when speaking with officers of lower rank, he was pleasant and affable. When speaking with officers of upper rank, he was formal and proper. When his lord was present, he combined an attitude of cautious respect with graceful ease. When called upon by his lord to receive a guest, his countenance would become alert and serious, and he would hasten his steps. When he saluted those in attendance beside him, extending his clasped hands to the left or right, as their position required. His robes remained perfectly arrayed, both front and back. Hastening forward, he moved smoothly as though gliding upon wings. Once the guest had left, he would always return to report, "The guest is no longer looking back." He would not instruct while eating, nor continue to converse once he had retired to bed. Even though a meal was only of coarse grain or vegetable broth, he invariably gave some as a sacrificial offering, and would do so in a grave and respectful manner. He would not sit unless his mat was straight. One day the stables burned. When the master returned from court, he asked, "Was anyone hurt?" He did not ask about the horses. When he was sick and his lord came to visit him, he would lay with his head to the east, draped in his court robes, with his ceremonial sash fashioned about him. When summoned by his lord, he would set off on foot without waiting for his horses to be hitched to the carriage. Upon entering the grand ancestral temple, he asked questions about everything. When receiving a gift from a friend, even something as valuable as a cart or a horse, he did not bow unless it was a gift of sacrificial meat. When he saw someone fasting or mourning, he invariably assumed a changed expression, even if they were an intimate acquaintance. When he saw someone wearing a ritual cap or a blind person, he would invariably display a respectful countenance, even if they were of low birth. When riding past someone dressed in a funeral garb, he would bow down and grasp the crossbar of his carriage. He would do so even if the mourner was a lowly peddler. When presented food with full ritual propriety, he would invariably assume a solemn expression and rise from his seat. He would also assume a solemn expression upon hearing a sudden clap of thunder or observing a fierce wind. Startled by their arrival, a bird arose and circled several times before alighting upon a branch. The master said, "This pheasant upon the mountain bridge. How timely it is! How timely it is!" Zilu saluted the bird, and it cried out 3 times before flying away. Book 11. The master said, Yan Hui is of no help to me. He is pleased with everything that I say. When Yan Hui died, Yan Lu, his father, requested the master's carriage so that it could be used for Yan Hui's coffin enclosure. The master replied, everyone recognizes his own son, whether he is talented or not. When Bo Yu, my own son, passed away, he had a coffin, but no enclosure. I did not go on foot in order to provide him with an enclosure. Having held rank below the ministers, it is not permissible for me to go on foot. When Yan Hui passed away, the master lamented, Oh, heaven has bereft me, heaven has bereft me. Zilu asked about serving ghosts and spirits. The master said, You are not yet able to serve people. How could you be able to serve ghosts and spirits? May I inquire about your death? You do not yet understand life. How could you possibly understand death? The master said, The heart of the Ji family is wealthier than even the Duke of Zhao ever was, and yet Ran Qiu collects taxes on his behalf to further increase his already excessive wealth. Ran Qiu is no disciple of mine. If your disciples were to sound the drums and attack him, I would not disapprove. Zilu asked, upon learning of something that needs to be done, should one immediately take care of it? The master replied, as long as one's father and elder brothers are still alive, how could one possibly take care of it immediately? On a later occasion, Ran Qiu asked, upon learning of something that needs to be done, should one immediately take care of it? The master replied, upon learning of it, you should immediately take care of it. Zi Hua inquired, when Zilu asked you whether or not one should immediately take care of something upon learning of it. You told him one should not, as long as one's father and elder brothers were still alive. When Ran Qiu asked the same question, however, you told him that one should immediately take care of it. I am confused and humbly ask to have this explained to me. The master said, Ran Qiu is overly cautious, and so I wished to urge him on. Zilu, on the other hand, is so impetuous, and so I sought to hold him back. Zilu, Zhang Shi, Ran Qiu, and Zi Hua were seated in attendance. The master said to them, I am older than any of you, but do not feel reluctant to speak your minds on the account. You are all in the habit of complaining. No one appreciates me. Well, if someone were to appreciate you, what would you do? Zilu spoke up immediately. If I were given charge of a state of 1,000 chariots, even one hemmed in between powerful states, suffering from armed invasions and afflicted by famine, before 3 years were up, I could infuse its people with courage and a sense of what is right. The master smiled at him. He then turned to Ran Qiu. You, Ran Qiu, he said, what would you do? Ran Qiu asked, if I were given a charge of a state 60 or 70, or even 50 or 60, sparely in area, before 3 years were up, I could see that the people would have all that they needed. As for instructing its people in ritual practice and music, this is a task that I would have to await the arrival of a gentleman. The master then turned to Zi Hua. You, Zi Hua, what would you do? Zi Hua answered, I am not saying what I would actually be able to do, but my wish at least would be to learn it. I would like to serve as a minor functionary, properly clad in ceremonial cap and gown, in ceremonies at the ancestral temple or diplomatic gatherings. The master then turned to Zhang Shi. You, Zhang Shi, what would you do? Zhang Shi stopped strumming his zither, and as the last notes faded away, he set the instrument aside and rose to his feet. I would choose to do something quite different from any of the other three. What harm is there in that? The master said. We are all just talking about our aspirations. Zhang Shi then said, in the 3rd month of spring, once the spring garments have been completed, I should like to assemble a company of 5 or 6 young men and 6 or 7 boys to go bathe in the Yi River and enjoy the breeze upon the rain dance altar, and then return singing to the master's house. The master sighed deeply, saying, I am with Zhang Shi. The other 3 disciples left, but Master Zhang stayed behind. He asked, what did you think of what the other disciples said? Each of them was simply talking about their aspirations. Then why, Master, did you smile at Zilu? One governs a state by means of ritual. His words failed to express a proper sense of deference, and that is why I smiled at him. Was Ran Q then not concerned with statecraft? Since when did something 60 or 70 or even 50 or 60 square li in area not constitute a state? Was Zihua then not concerned with statecraft? If ancestral temples and diplomatic gatherings are not the business of the feudal lords, what then are they? If Zihua's aspiration is a minor one, then what would be considered a major one? Book 12. Yan Hui asked about goodness. The master said, restraining yourself and returning to the rights constitutes goodness. If for one day you manage to restrain yourself and return to the rights, in this way you could lead the entire world back to goodness. The key to achieving goodness lies within yourself. How could it come from others? Yan Hui asked, may I inquire as to the specifics? The master said, do not look unless it is in accordance with the ritual. Do not listen unless it is in accordance with ritual. Do not speak unless it is in accordance with ritual. Do not move unless it is in accordance with ritual. Yan Hui replied, although I am not quick to understand, I ask permission to devote myself to this teaching. Zhang Gong asked about goodness. The master said, when in public, comport yourself as if you were receiving an important guest, and in your management of the common people, behave as if you were overseeing a great sacrifice. Do not impose upon others what you yourself do not desire. In this way, you will encounter no resentment in your public or private life. Zhang Gong replied, although I am not quick to understand, I ask permission to devote myself to this teaching. Anxiously, Sima Niu remarked, everyone has brothers. I alone have none. Zi Xia replied, I have heard it said life and death are governed by fate, wealth and honor are determined by heaven. A gentleman is respectful and free of errors. He is reverent and ritually proper in his dealings with others. In this way, everyone within the four seas is his brother. How could a gentleman be concerned about not having brothers? Zigong asked about governing. The master said, simply make sure there is sufficient food, sufficient armaments, and that you have the confidence of the common people. Zigong said, if sacrificing one of these three things became unavoidable, which would you sacrifice first? The master replied, I would sacrifice the armaments. Zigong said, if sacrificing one of the two remaining things became unavoidable, which would you sacrifice next? The master replied, I would sacrifice the food. Death has always been with us, but a state cannot stand once it has lost the confidence of the people. Ji Zicheng said, being a gentleman is simply a matter of having the right native substance and nothing else. Why must one engage in cultural refinement? Zigong replied, it is regrettable, sir, that you should not speak of the gentleman in this way. As they say, a team of horses cannot overtake your tongue. A gentleman's cultural refinement resembles his native substance, and his native substance resembles his cultural refinement. The skin of a tiger or leopard, shorn of its fur, is no different from the skin of a dog or sheep. Duke Ai said to Master Yo, the harvest was poor, and I cannot satisfy my needs. What should I do? Master Yo said, why do you not try taxing the people 1 part in 10? I am currently taxing them 2 parts in 10, and even so I cannot satisfy my needs. How could reducing the tax to 1 part in 10 help? Master Yo answered, if the common people's needs are satisfied, how could their lord be lacking? If the common people's needs are not satisfied, how can their lord be content? Duke Jing of Qi asked Kongzi about governing. Kongzi responded, let the lord be a true lord, the ministers true ministers, the fathers true fathers, and the sons true sons. The duke replied, well put. Certainly if the lord is not a true lord, the ministers not true ministers, the father not true fathers, and the sons not true sons. Even if there is sufficient grain, will I ever get to eat it? The master said, when it comes to hearing civil litigation, I am as good as anyone else. What is necessary, though, is not to bring it about that there is no civil litigation at all. Ji Kongzi asked Kongzi about governing. Kongzi responded, to govern, Zhang, means to be correct, Zhang. If you set an example by being correct yourself, who will dare to be incorrect? Ji Kongzi was concerned about the prevalence of robbers in Lu and asked Kongzi about how to deal with this problem. Kongzi said if you could just get rid of your own excessive desires, the people would not steal even if you rewarded them for it. Ji Kongzi asked Kongzi about governing, saying, if I were to execute those who lacked the way in order to advance those who possessed the way, how would that be? Kongzi responded, in your governing, sir, what need is there for executions? If you desire goodness, then the common people will be good. The virtue of a gentleman is like the wind, and the virtue of a petty person is like the grass. When the wind moves over the grass is sure to bend. Fan Chi asked about goodness. The master replied, care for others. He then asked about wisdom, and the master replied, know others. Fan Chi still did not understand, so the master elaborated, raise up the straight and apply them to the crooked, and the crooked will be made straight. Fan Chi retired from the master's presence. Seeing Zi Xia, he said, just before I asked the master about wisdom, and he replied, raise up the straight and apply them to the crooked, and the crooked will be made straight. What did he mean by that? Zi Xia answered, what a wealth of instruction you have received! When Shun ruled the world, he selected from amongst the multitude, raising up Gao Yao and those who were not good, then kept their distance. When Tang ruled the world, he selected from amongst the multitude, raising up Yi Yin and those who were not good, then kept their distance. The master Zhang said, the gentleman acquires friends by means of cultural refinement, and then relies upon his friends for support in becoming good. Book 13. Zilu asked, if the Duke of Wei were to employ you to serve in the government of his state, what would be your first priority? The master answered, it would of course be the rectification of names. Zilu said, could you, master, really be so far off the mark? Why worry about rectifying names? The master replied, how boorish you are, Zilu. When it comes to matters that he does not understand, the gentleman should remain silent. If names are not rectified, speech will not accord with reality. When speech does not accord with reality, things will not be successfully accomplished. When things are not successfully accomplished, ritual practice and music will fail to flourish. When ritual and music fail to flourish, punishments and penalties will miss the mark. And when the punishments and penalties miss the mark, the common people will be at a loss as to what to do with themselves. This is why the gentleman only applies names that can be properly spoken and assures that what he says can be properly put into action. The gentleman simply guards against arbitrariness in his speech. That is all there is to it. Fan Chi asked to learn about plowing and growing grain from Kongzi. The master said, when it comes to that, any old farmer would be a better teacher than I. He asked to learn about growing fruits and vegetables. The master said, when it comes to that, any old gardener would be a better teacher than I. Fan Chi then left. The master remarked, what a common fellow that Fan Chi is. When a ruler loves ritual propriety, then none among his people will dare to be disrespectful. When a ruler loves rightness, then none among his people will dare to not obey. When a ruler loves trustworthiness, then none of his people will dare to not be honest. The mere existence of such a ruler would cause the common people throughout the world to bundle their children on their backs and seek him out. Of what use, then, is the study of agriculture? The master said, imagine a person who can recite the 300 odes by heart, but when delegated a governmental task is unable to carry it out, or when sent abroad as an envoy is unable to engage in repartee. No matter how many odes he might have memorized, what good are they to him? The master said, when the ruler is correct, his will is put into effect without the need for official orders. When the ruler's person is not correct, he will not be obeyed, no matter how many orders he issues. The master said, if a true king were to arise, he would certainly see it return to goodness after a single generation. The Duke of Shi asked about governing. The master said, act so that those near to you are pleased, and those who are far from you are drawn closer. The Duke of the Shi said to Kongzi, among my people there is one we call Upright Gong. When his father stole a sheep, he reported him to the authorities. Kongzi replied, "Among my people, those who we consider upright are different from this. Fathers cover up for their sons, and sons cover up for their fathers. Uprightness is to be found in this." Zigong asked, "What does a person have to be like before he could be called a true scholar official?" The master said, "Conducting himself with a sense of shame, and not dishonoring his ruler's mandate when sent abroad as a diplomat. Such a person should be called a scholar official. May I ask what the next best type of person is like? His lineage and clan consider him filial. His fellow villagers consider him respectful to his elders. And the next best? In his speech, he insists on being trustworthy, and with regard to his actions, he insists that they bear fruit. What a narrow, rigid little man he is, and yet he might still be considered the next best. How about those who today are involved in government?" The master exclaimed, "Oh, those petty functionaries are not even worth considering." The master said, "If you cannot manage to find a person of perfectly balanced conduct to associate with, I suppose you must settle for the wild or the fastidious." In their pursuit of the way, the wild plunge right in, while the fastidious are always careful not to get their hands dirty. Zigong asked, "What would you make of a person whom everyone in the village likes?" The master said, "I would not know what to make of him." "What about someone whom everyone in the village hates?" "I would still not know. Better this way. Those in the village who are good like him, and those who are not good hate him." Book 14. Yuan Si asked about shame. The master said, "When the state has the way, accept a salary. When the state is without the way, to accept a salary is shameful. To refrain from competitiveness, boastfulness, envy, and greed, can this be considered goodness?" The master said, "This can be considered difficult, but as for its being good, that I do not know." The master said, "Those who possess virtue will inevitably have something to say, whereas those who have something to say do not necessarily possess virtue. Those who are good will necessarily display courage, but those who display courage are not necessarily good." Nan Gong Kuo said to Kongzi, "Yi was a skillful archer, and Ao was a powerful naval commander, and yet neither of them met a natural death. You and Ho Ji on the other hand, did nothing but personally tend to the land, and yet they both ended up with possession of the world." The master did not answer. After Nangong Kuo left, the master sighed, "What a gentlemanly person that man is! How he reveres virtue." Zilu asked about the complete person. The master said, "Take a person as wise as Zhang Wuzhong, as free of desire as Gong Chuo, as courageous as Zhuangzi of Bian, and as accomplished in the arts as Ran Qiu, and then acculturate them by means of ritual and music. Such a man might be called a complete person." He then continued, "But must a complete person today be exactly like this? When seeing a chance for profit, he thinks of what is right. When confronting danger, he is ready to take his life into his own hands. When enduring an extended period of hardship, he does not forget what he had professed in more fortunate times. Such a man might also be called a complete person." The master asked Gong Ming Jia about Gong Shu Wenzi, saying, "Is it really true that your master did not speak, did not laugh, and did not take?" Gong Ming Jia answered, "Whoever told you that was exaggerating. My master only spoke when the time was right, and so people never grew impatient listening to him. He only laughed when he was genuinely full of joy, and so people never tired of hearing him laugh. He only took what was rightfully his, and so people never resented his taking of things." The master said, "Was he really that good? Could he really have been that good?" The master said, "In ancient times, scholars learned for their own sake. These days, they learn for the sake of others." Ku Bo Yu sent a messenger to Kongzi. Kongzi sat down beside him and asked, "How are things with your master?" The messenger replied, "My master wishes to reduce his faults, but has not yet been able to do so." After the messenger left, the master said, "Now that is a messenger. That is a messenger." The master said, "The gentleman is ashamed to have his words exceed his actions." Zigong was given to criticizing others. The master remarked sarcastically, "What a worthy man that Zigong must be, for As for me, I hardly have the time for this. The master said, do not worry that you are not recognized by others. Worry that rather that you yourself lack ability. Someone asked, what do you think of the saying, requite inquiry with kindness? The master replied, with what then would one request kindness? Requite injury with uprightness, and kindness with kindness. The master sighed. No one understands me, do they? Zigong replied, how can you say that no one understands you, master? I am not bitter toward heaven, nor do I blame others. I study what is below in order to comprehend what is above. If there is anyone who could understand me, perhaps it is heaven. Gongbo Liao submitted an accusation against Zilu to the head of the Ji family. Zifu Jingbo reported this to Kongzi, asking, what master has certainly been led astray by Gongbo Liao, but my influence with him is still sufficient to see to it that Gongbo Liao's corpse is displayed at court or in the marketplace. The master said, whether or not the way is to be put into action is a matter of fate. Whether or not the way is to be discarded is also a matter of fate. What power does Gongbo Liao have to affect fate? Zilu spent the night at Stone Gate. The next morning, the gatekeeper asked him, where have you come from? Zilu answered, from the house of Kongzi. Isn't he the one who knows that what he does is impossible and yet persists anyway? The master was playing the stone chimes in the state of Wei. A man with a wicker basket strapped to his back passed by the door of the Kong family residence and remarked, whoever is playing the chimes like that certainly has something on his mind. After listening for a moment, he asked, how despicable is this petty stubbornness? If no one understands you, just tend to yourself. If the river ford is deep, use the stepping stones. If it is shallow, simply raise your hem. The master, hearing these comments, responded, such resoluteness! Who could take issue with that? Book 15. Duke Ling of Wei asked Kongzi about military formations. Kongzi replied, I know something about the arrangement of ceremonial stands and dishes for ritual offerings, but I have never learned about the arrangement of battalions and divisions. He left the next day. When Kongzi was besieged in the state of Chen, all of the provisions were exhausted, and his followers were so weak from hunger that they could not even stand. Upset, Zilu appeared before the master and said, does even the gentleman encounter hardship? The master said, of course the gentleman encounters hardship. The difference is that the petty man encountering hardship is overwhelmed by it. The master said, Zigong, do you regard me as simply one who learns much and remembers it? Zigong said, I do. Is that not the case? The master said, it is not. I string it together on a single thread. The master said, is Shun not an example of someone who ruled by means of non-action? What did he do? He made himself reverent and took his proper ritual position facing south. That is all. The master said, no scholar official of noble intention or good person would ever pursue life at the expense of goodness. And in fact, some may be called upon to give up their lives in order to fulfill goodness. Yan Hui asked about running a state. The master said, follow the calendar of Xia. Travel in the carriages of the Shang and clothe yourself in the ceremonial caps of the Zhao. As for music, listen only to the Xiao and Wu. Prohibit the tunes of Zhang and keep glib people at a distance, for the tunes of Zhang are licentious and glib people are dangerous. The master said, I have never been able to do anything for a person who is not himself constantly asking, what should I do? What should I do? The master said, the gentleman takes rightness as his substance, puts it into practice by means of ritual, gives it expression through modesty, and perfects it by being trustworthy. Now that is a gentleman. The master said, the gentleman seeks it in himself, the petty person seeks it in others. Zigong asked, is there one teaching that can serve as a guide for one's entire life? The master answered, is it not sympathetic understanding, Shu? Do not impose upon others what you yourself do not desire. The master said, when the multitude hates a person, you must examine them and judge for yourself. The same holds true for someone whom the multitude love. The master said, human beings can broaden the way. It is not the way that broadens human beings. The master said, to make a mistake and yet not change your ways. This is what it is called truly making a mistake. The master said, once engaged in thought for an entire day without eating and an entire night without sleeping. But it did no good. It would have been better for me to have spent that time in learning. Master said, when it comes to being good, defer to no one, not even your teacher. The master said, the gentleman is true, but not rigidly trustworthy. The master said, in education there are no differences in kind. The master said, words should convey their point and leave it at that. The blind music master Mian came to see Kongzi. When they came to the steps, the master said, here are the steps. When they reached his seat, the master said, here's your seat. After everyone was seated, the master informed him as to who was present, saying, so and so is seated here, and so is seated over there. When the music master left, Zi Zhang asked, is this the way to converse with the music master? The master replied, yes, this is indeed the way to assist a music master. Book 16. Kongzi said, beneficial types of friendship number 3. As to harmful types of friendship, befriending the upright, those who are true to their word, or those of broad learning. These are the beneficial types of friendship. Befriending clever flatterers, skillful dissemblers, or the smoothly glib. These are the harmful types of friendship. Kongzi said, beneficial types of joy number 3, as to harmful types of joy. Taking joy in regulating yourself through the rites and music, in commending the excellence of others, or in possessing many worthy friends. These are the beneficial types of joy. Taking joy in arrogant behavior, idle amusements, or decadent licentiousness. These are the harmful types of joy. Kongzi said, the gentleman guards against 3 things. When he is young and his blood and qi are still unstable, he guards himself against temptation of female beauty. When he reaches his prime and his blood and qi have become unyielding, he guards against being contentious. And when he reaches old age and his blood and qi have begun to decline, he guards against being acquisitive. The master said, the gentleman stands in awe of 3 things, the mandate of heaven, great men, and the teachings of the sages. The petty person does not understand the mandate of heaven, and thus does not regard it with awe. He shows respect to great men, and ridicules the teachings of the sages. Kongzi said, those who are born understanding it are the best. Those who come to understand it through learning are second. Those who find it difficult to understand it and yet persist in their studies come next. People who find it difficult to understand but do not even try to learn are the worst of all. Ziqin asked Bo Yu, have you acquired an esoteric learning? Bo Yu replied, I have not. My father was once standing by himself in the courtyard, and as I hurried by with quickened steps, he asked, have you learned the odes? I replied, not yet. He said, if you do not learn the odes, you will lack the means to speak. I then retired and learned the odes. On another day, my father was once again standing by himself in the courtyard. And as I hurried by with quickened steps, he asked, have you learned ritual? I replied, not yet. He said, if you do not learn ritual, you will lack the means to take your place. I then retired and learned ritual. These 2 things are what I have been taught. Ziqin retired and smiling to himself remarked, I asked 1 question and got 3 answers. I learned about the odes, I learned about ritual, and I learned how the gentleman keeps his son at a distance. Book 17. The master said, by nature people are similar. They diverge as the result of practice. The master said, Zilu, have you heard about the 6 virtuous words and their corresponding vices? Zilu replied, I have not. Sit, I will tell you about them. Loving goodness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of foolishness. Loving wisdom without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of deviance. Loving trustworthiness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of harmful rigidity. Loving uprightness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in a vice of intolerance. Loving courage without balancing it with the love of learning will result in a vice of unruliness. Loving resoluteness without balancing it with the love of learning will result in a vice of willfulness. The master said, little ones, Why do none of you learn the odes? The odes can be a source of inspiration and a basis for evaluation. They can help you come together with others as well as to properly express complaints. In the home, they teach you about how to serve your father, and in public life, they teach you about how to serve your Lord. They also broadly acquaint you with the names of various birds, beasts, plants, and trees. The master said to Bo Yu, have you mastered the odes from the south of Zhou and the south of Shao? The man who has not mastered the south of Zhou and the south of Shao is like someone standing with his face to the wall, is he not? The master said, when we say the rites, are we speaking merely of jade and silk? When we say music, are we speaking merely of bells and drums? The master said, the village worthy is the thief of virtue. The master said, I hate that purple has usurped the place of vermilion, that the tunes of Zhang have been confused with classical music, and that the clever of tongue have undermined both state and family. The master sighed, would that I did not have to speak. Zigong said, if the master did not speak, then how would we little ones receive guidance from you? The master replied, what does heaven ever say? Yet the 4 seasons are put in motion by it, and the myriad creatures receive their life from it. What does heaven ever say? Zaiwo asked about the 3-year mourning period, saying, surely 1 year is long enough. If the gentleman refrains from practicing ritual for 3 years, the rites will surely fall into ruin. If he refrains from music for 3 years, this will surely be disastrous for music. After the lapse of a year, the old grain has been used up, while the new grain has ripened, and the different types of tinder have all been drilled in order to rekindle the fire. 1 year is surely long enough. The master asked, would you feel comfortable then eating your sweet rice and wearing your brocade gowns? I would. The master replied, well, if you would feel comfortable doing so, then by all means you should do it. When the gentleman is in mourning, he gets no pleasure from eating sweet foods, finds no joy in listening to music, and feels no comfort in his place of dwelling. This is why he gives up these things. But if you would feel comfortable doing them, then by all means you should. After Zaiwo left, the master remarked, this shows how lacking in goodness this Zaiwo is. A child is completely dependent upon the care of his parents for the first 3 years of his life. This is why the 3-year mourning period is the common practice throughout the world. Did Zaiwo not receive 3 years of care from his parents? Zilu asked, does the gentleman admire courage? The master said, the gentleman admires rightness above all. A gentleman who possessed courage but lacked a sense of rightness would create political disorder, while a common person who possessed courage but lacked a sense of rightness would become a bandit. The master said, women and servants are particularly hard to manage. If you are too familiar with them, they grow insolent, but if you are too distant, they grow resentful. Kongzi passed Chengju and Jieni, who were yoked together pulling a plow through a field. He sent Zilu to ask them where the ford was to be found. Chengju inquired, that fellow holding the reins there, who is he? Zilu answered, that is Kongzi. Do you mean Kongzi of Lu? The same. Then he should know where the ford is. Zilu then asked Jieni. Jieni also replied with a question, who are you? I am Zilu, the disciple of Kongzi of Lu. Yes. The whole world is if engulfed in a great flood, and who can change it? Given this, instead of following a scholar who merely avoids the bad people of this age, wouldn't it be better for you to follow scholars like us who avoid the age itself? He then proceeded to cover up his seeds with dirt and did not pause again. Zilu returned and reported his conversation to Kongzi. The master was lost in thought for a moment and then remarked, a person cannot flock together with the birds and the beasts. If I do not associate with the followers of men, then with whom would I associate? If the way were realized in the world, then I would not need to change anything. Zilu was traveling with Kongzi, but had fallen behind. He encountered an old man carrying a wicker basket suspended from his staff. Zilu asked, have you seen my master? The old man answered, won't soil his dainty hands, can't tell millet from barley. Who then might your master be? Then he planted his staff on the ground and began weeding. Not knowing how to reply, Zilu simply remained standing with his hands clasped as a sign of respect. The old man subsequently invited Zilu back up to his house to stay the night. After killing a chicken and preparing some millet for Zilu to eat, he presented his 2 sons to him. On the next day, Zilu caught up to Kongzi and told him what had happened. He must be a scholar recluse, the master said. He sent Zilu back to the old farmer's house to meet with him again. But by the time Zilu got there, the man had already disappeared. Zilu then remarked, to avoid public service is to be without a sense of what is right. Proper relations between elders and juniors cannot be discarded. How then can one discard the rightness that obtains between a ruler and minister? To do so is to wish to keep one's hands from getting dirty at the expense of throwing the greater social order into chaos. The gentleman takes office in order to do what is right, even though he already knows that the way will not be realized. Those men who went into seclusion, including Bo Yi, Shu Qi, Yu Zhang, Yi Yi, Zhu Zhang, Liu Xia, Liu Xiahui, and Xiao Lian, the master said, unwilling to lower their aspirations or bring disgrace upon their persons, such were Bo Yi and Shu Qi. If Liu Xia, Hui, and Xiao Lian, he said, although they lowered their aspirations brought disgrace upon their persons, at least their speech was in accord with their status, and their actions were in accord with their thoughts. Of Yu Zhang and Yi Yi, he said, living in seclusion and freely speaking their minds, their persons remained pure and their resignations from office were well considered. He concluded, I, however, am different from all of them in that I have no preconceived notions of what is permissible and what is not. Book 19. Zixia said, learning broadly and firmly, retaining what one has learned, being incisive in one's questioning, and able to reflect upon what is near at hand. Goodness is to be found in this. Zixia said, the various artisans dwell in their workshops in order to perfect their crafts, just as the gentleman learns in order to reach the end of his way. Zixia said, as long as one does not transgress the bounds, when it comes to important virtues, it is permissible to cross the line here and there. When it comes to minor virtues, Ziyo said among the disciples of Zixia, the younger ones are fairly competent when it comes to tasks such as mopping and sweeping, answering summons, and entering and retiring from formal company. But these are all superficialities. They are completely at a loss when it comes to mastering the basics. Why is this? When Zixia heard of this, he remarked, alas, Ziyo seems to have missed the point. Whose disciples will be the first to be taught the way of the gentleman, and then in the end grow tired of it? It is like the grass and the trees. You make distinctions between them according to their kind. The way of the gentleman, how can it be slandered so? Starting at the beginning and working through to the end. Surely this describes none other than the sage. Ziyo said, mourning should fully express grief, and then stop at that. Zigong said, a gentleman's errors are like an eclipse of the sun or the moon. When he errs, everyone notices it, but when he makes amends, everyone looks up to him. Book 20. Kongzi said, one who does not understand fate lacks the means to become a gentleman. One who does not understand ritual lacks the means to take his place. One who does not understand words lacks the means to evaluate others. Okay. So, it did take a bit to read, but I don't have to think about it, I guess, down the road for reading the rest of them. But, so, like the introduction said, as I'd been reading through it, kind of when it mentioned in the later books that you could hang all of these things that he taught on it, like on a single thread. Basically, this all seems to come down to self-discipline. But it's not just self-discipline, it's the motives for your self-discipline. So, just like the Prometheus Manifesto, it talks about the inner person rather than just focusing on changing the outward of everything. So, like, governments currently talk about changing the outward and changing the things on the outside. Whereas society, you wouldn't even need those laws if people were changed on the inside. And propaganda doesn't always do that, because a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So, kind of to start off with book one, kind of, this seems like an introduction to a lot of it. So you kind of see like this expanse from like a smaller one. So the book one starts off with familial relations, a person that is devoted to their parents and shows an honor of their parents, as the proverb as the proverb goes, honor thy father and thy mother. And then often added is that thy days may be long upon the earth, which the Lord thy God giveth thee. So you see in the first point how gentlemanliness is defined partially. So we see the term of a gentleman kind of brought up as throughout the later books. They seem to focus on an almost singular theme for a good bit of it, but at the same time they break out. So when it comes to the core of being filial, the first thing brought up is like feeding your parents. Let me see. Okay, so well, no, it's doing the rituals for your ancestors. So like honoring your ancestors. So you've got honoring your ancestors and respecting your superiors. So at the start, you're basically getting this whole like core of respect going on. By bringing it down to that local level of like your family and focusing on that, you build the core for expanding out to the rest of the world. Because when you respect yourself, when you respect your family, it becomes much easier to respect the rest of the world. When you hear of someone, for example, that kills their own family, it really becomes a worry of if they were willing to do that to their own children, if they were willing to do that to their own parents, imagine how much less they would feel for someone outside of their family. So that's why when you see someone that has great honor, a heartfelt honor for his own family, and they fulfill these rituals and these rites and honors for their ancestors because of the love of their family rather than just going through the motions, then they start planting the seed for that brotherly love within society, and they change the way that they interact with other people. If they didn't have that developed at first and develop it over time, you'll see those that have a genuine love for their family act differently than those that don't have a genuine love for their family. Now, I can understand that sometimes it's more difficult to show that same love for certain people of your family, but that's also where, like, truly, like, finding a way to see the inner person and find things that you can appreciate and honor within them will help change that mindset and actually change society. And like is mentioned on, with that kind of a virtue within you, you can even help affect change within that person that at first maybe you didn't love as much. And he goes into it here talking about being rich and poor. But I think there are later portions that talk about that a little bit better. So book 2, here's where we have the portion about being filial and nourishing your parents. So at one point you could consider like the obligations of a child is by feeding their parents. So like in Asian culture, as far as I know, I mean, there are people that can definitely correct me, but this is from what I've observed and heard and all over the place, is that in essence, the parents' retirement plan is in their child, which is why they invest so much in their child at first to go to college and school and everything else, to get a good education, is so that they can have a good standing. But then at the same time, later on in life, when it comes time for the parents to retire, the child has an obligation to take care of their parents. It's like paying that back. So it'll bring it up later on, talking about mourning is basically you're under your parents' care. You have a number of years that they've cared for you, so then you return what they've given you in essence. But hopefully that's not with a begrudging heart. And hopefully you've had that heart of gratitude and you're doing it out of a feeling of gratitude for what they've given you rather than being begrudgingly doing it because it's an obligation. And that's where, again, that filial heart and filial that's where that being a filial child or son comes into play. That, well, the wording here is filial piety towards your parents. So they've done all this work up front, now it's your turn to repay that. And the odes come up a number of times. The odes are mentioned. I should probably at least read those to get a better understanding of what's going on here, but you see excerpts brought in from it. So there's another thing here mentioned too, talking about the difference between government and being a filial son, is that by being a good filial son, you are partaking in government because you're not just a person with a title. You're actually affecting from the ground level how the government would act and need to do. So when you take time to take care of your parents, you're taking that strain off of what could otherwise be the government taking care of it. So for example, if for a child that helps their parents with like work or other shopping or health needs, that may, for example, may be a veteran, then that takes that burden off of the VA from taking care of it here in the US. And that way you are in essence taking part in government. But not only that, you in essence get to, in the way that you take care of them and you care for them and your filial nature, that translates into the way that you're going to vote, and that can change your local government that way. So you participate in the government in multiple different ways by serving and also by participating in the process. Okay, let's go back up. Okay, book 3. So, I'm trying to pick out highlights. So, actually, this one. So, talking about sacrifice for ancestors. So, talking about being fully present. So, this again goes into the begrudging portion of it. So, whether you are serving someone or you are offering something up, if you do it with a begrudging heart, why do you do it at all? It's basically as if you didn't really do it. Just like the sacrifice, if you are not fully present, if you are not fully there, if you are not all in, it means nothing because your heart isn't in it. So when you serve and offer something up of yourself, you do it fully rather than partially. You offer your whole versus your quarter. And that can be the hard part sometimes. Is there are points where, like, say for a job maybe that someone has, that you may have, there are other things you want to put your whole into, and at the same time over the job over here, you only do it because you need to, so that you have something to subsist on. There are things that we prefer to do, and there are ways that we can turn that into a way that we can subsist on, but right now we're over here. So while we're over here, why don't we put our all into working over here so that when we get to the point to where we're doing what we want to and we're able to subsist on it, then we're able to put our whole into it in that moment. So it's not necessarily that you're splitting yourself between it. It's that in the present moment, you're fully present. Not that you're partially present and want to be somewhere else. And that, I know I've had different things myself where it's like I haven't been fully present at work, but I've wanted to be over here. But I've tried to always put my best into my work, no matter what it is, so that I can say because it's a thing I take pride in, is being able to do a good job. There comes a point, though, sometimes where you are arguing the virtue of it, the nature of your job with, so the virtue of your value system versus the virtue of your job, and they may be on different levels of it, and so that may require a change sometimes. So actually, earlier on, so talking about color. So the background, the background is the foundation for what we apply color to. So throughout all these teachings, basically he's laying out the foundation, starts out laying the foundation for creating a better society, giving virtues that people can follow in order to bring back that golden age that they once enjoyed. But you have to start with a foundation before you can add all the other things in. You need that background present, the suitable background, in order for your colors and arts to come alive in the painting. So you can spit and slather paint all over a canvas, but it won't come together as a beautiful piece unless you have, one, the right foundation, and then two, the colors in harmony to go along with it. Because you can have a good foundation, but if you do not build upon each layer and harmonize the colors together, then all you've made is a mess on canvas. And that's kind of as you go through these books, the Analects, each thing seems to have a layer. It just digs deeper and deeper and deeper into things and expands out the it expands the scope of what you're dealing with. And again, coming back to on 3:18, talking about serving your Lord in every detail of ritual propriety. Basically, you can be ritualistic, but people are going to think you're ridiculous. But if you serve out of your heart versus just out of ritual, people will notice that because there's a difference in the way that you serve. And they'll think better of you for it, or they'll think you're ridiculous because of it. So book 4, let's see, starting off with a lot about goodness and the good. So I find it so only one who is good is able to truly love others or despise others. So I think when you're looking at, so it's like looking through the world in a lens. If you have a good heart, you're looking at the world through a purer lens. And so you're able to discern better who's good and who's not. It becomes easier to love others or despise others. But if you're truly good, you love others and you try and help them to become better. So by saying only he who is good is truly able to despise others, the truly good never really despise anyone. They love everyone, and they seek to help others become good. So I'm not sure how you would put it. Seems kind of funny that you would add despise others onto it, even though it wouldn't apply, but at the same time it's a wise thing, because it's like, when you really dig into it, it's like, wait, who do the good truly despise? So, and then the next one, merely set your heart sincerely upon goodness, and you will be free of bad intentions. So if you direct yourself toward that goodness, those intentions that you have to do evil become less and less. So you set yourself up to grow in virtue, to grow grace upon grace, and those bad intentions, those bad tendencies start to fade away. Because as you focus on perfecting yourself, on doing more good and bringing more good into your life, then those things basically kind of wash out of the way or pushed out of you. You change who you associate with. You change what you watch, what you focus on, and everything else. And it becomes a lot easier for people to see that light in you growing and to be attracted to you. As noted by other portions of the Analects that mention how by having a truly virtuous official, and by holding up the straight before the crooked will become straight. So if the people that are leaders are examples of those virtues, then the people are more inclined to direct themselves and become straighter. But when the officials are not in that alignment, then what motivation do the people have to become straight and walk down the straight and narrow? Let's see. So okay, so this is kind of stemming from that. Do not be concerned with that you lack an official position, but rather concern yourself with the means by which you might become established. So it's not necessarily that you have to be known or that you have to have a position as an official. It's that you develop virtues, and then those things, that influence will grow. And not only will that virtue become established in you, but you'll grow an influence with others. And you'll find that following that you'll be able to help people become. You'll become worthy to be known, as it mentions there. And it's a weird, I'm not sure how I would exactly put it. People will be attracted to you, and people will bring other people to you because of what you are disseminating to others. So you become worthy of being known by acting upon what you learn and incorporating those virtues into you. And then other people see that, because again, this comes down to growing that influence within yourself, starting with yourself, that foundation of yourself and your family, and then that grows outside of those circles as people start to notice. So maybe it goes on to your neighbors, and then you decide to do something on the internet, so it grows out from not just your neighbors, but maybe other people on the internet and places that you associate. And then other places inside your town and like your various associations, like your ecclesiastical organization or what have you. So this is a nice short one I like. The gentleman understands rightness, whereas the petty person understands profit. So there's also, I think in today's world, you could say the gentleman understands rightness, whereas the petty person understands what is woke capital. So what do you profit from anything if you deviate from your virtue in order to adopt a certain worldview that may not necessarily be right? So if we look at where some companies have changed and how they've been abandoned by some of their base, they in essence abandon their customer base for this thing that seems to look more popular, maybe on social media. And in turn, they end up losing their customers, and they start to understand, hey, where did we go wrong? It's this gentleman that understands rightness that attracts those people to him and thereby gains that capital, that profit in a natural way rather than focusing on profit from the outset. So this is one thing that I've tried to focus on, is focus on doing the rightness before the profit comes, because the profit will come down the road. It's a matter of getting yourself in the rightness, becoming worthy of being known, and then the other things will come later on down the road. And this is the challenge, because we've got so many things that we've got to worry about in our world that are natural. It's like, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to do this? I can't focus on this. But if you can find creative ways to be able to focus on building that virtue, then the profit on the other end will come, and you'll be able to focus even more on that virtue, more so. And that's one thing that I've been working toward, is focusing on perfecting my processes for things. And honestly, I've had to rearrange things because of changing situations, but I've tried to focus on where I feel I need to be focusing, and then the opportunities to be able to do that more will come, and the profit for it will come, but I can't expect it right now. You focus on setting yourself right, and then the riches will come later. It's not riches before virtue, it's virtue before riches. So this is kind of a part of that. On when you see someone who is worthy, concentrate upon becoming their equal. So you basically have someone that's worthy, and they're like that marker that you want to reach to. So sometimes you've got those figureheads that are not in the world with us, but you've got people that are closer to there that you can use as mile markers to become equal with, that you can work towards. And then when you see someone who is unworthy, use this as an opportunity to look within yourself. So when I see someone else, if I see someone do something stupid on the road, do I just scream at them? Or do I also look within myself, like, have I ever done that myself? It's that inward looking expression when you see something like, wait, before I start on that, because I still have a tendency to complain, but I try and turn that around into, okay, have I done that thing? Do I need to change that? How is it better? It's also the deal where, like, when someone makes a mistake and you don't quite understand the process, maybe you learn about the process a little bit more to see, like, okay, I can see how that can be a common mistake and how that's really easy to make now. It's not just a matter of, like, a whole motion. It's like, okay, it's a small, really easy typo, and I can see why that's way more common now. It's like with tax documents. You can see, like, there's one small typo, and it's like, okay, very understandable. When it's a whole tax person, and you're trying to do that same thing, and they mess the whole number up, it's like, okay, maybe they were processing a whole bunch of documents that day, and they messed it up. Got things mixed up. It becomes really hard when they make a really obvious mistake, like putting a 1 in for a name control or a quadruple 0 as a name control. That's where you see, like, the laziness come in, and where it's like, okay, no. You must always be aware of the age of your parents. On the one hand, it is a cause for rejoicing. On the other, a source of anxiety. So not only are your parents aging, and they are advancing, hopefully in wisdom, but also it's coming closer to their death day, because you don't always want to lose your parents, honestly. Especially when you've grown that filial love and you've grown that filial piety with them. So that's kind of where the anxiety can come in, is that they're leaving. What do I have to lean upon? So this is one interesting one. Very few go astray who comport themselves with restraint. It's really hard to veer too far off the straight and narrow when you have a focus that when you're focusing on something. So you have that constraint that you can focus on the forward target, and you're not going to veer very far off. Whereas someone who doesn't have a target, they're going to go off in every which way, and we see that in the world today. Is this veering off in every which way. Okay. I am going to shorten this up. Yeah. Let's see. So yeah, book 5. There's a lot of government affiliation things going on. So again, he focuses on, in these people, whether they seek for statehood or whether they are in statehood. It's this, they share their aspirations, but at the same time, it's the idea of looking inwardly and being a leader and leading as an official versus pushing people as an official. And that's what outward laws do, is they push people rather than leading people. And when you incorporate these virtues, you start in the front and you walk down a path and you in essence guide people, and because of the natural need to not be left behind, they're going to walk and they're going to follow, and so they become better because of it. In our world, we just have a bunch of crooked leaders, and so we get a bunch of crooked people. So book 6, let's see, So again, this is so I think if we were to focus on one thing, who is able to leave a room without going through the door? How is it then that no one follows this way? So the way is basically that doorway. It's the way you leave the room. How is it that someone can go through life and not follow the way? The way leads to freedom. Ultimately, even though it seems like it's like, but there are all these rules and constraints, but it's like, the way is truly the way to happiness, joy, and freedom. And it's by going through that, and people try and avoid that in every other way, whereas when they incorporate these things, it also leads to harmony with it in the social order. But people want to skip it and try and tell everyone what to do, when what they could really do is incorporate that in, and they would gain more respect. They would not only gain more respect, but people would follow them due to it. Okay, so book 7. This is, let's see. So yeah, this is kind of the pursuit and focusing yourself again on the way. So the way is basically an ideal, and that's the ideal that you're working toward and that you're focused on. And by having that focus, how far off are you going to veer from it? So it's like you're setting your heart on it. And that's kind of like where memorizing the odes becomes a thing, because memorization can be a way to where you can recite these things over and over to yourself, and where you're, in a sense, incorporating it into yourself. But, and book 8 actually goes into this, is find inspiration in the odes, take your place through ritual, and achieve perfection with music. So it's in these different practices and in the odes in which you can guide yourself, and through rote memorization, hopefully you're also writing it into your heart, and that you are practicing it and not just memorizing it, because you can memorize it and that's nice, but then that just becomes emotion, and it doesn't truly become a part of you, which is the intention of a memorization of things that way, is to make it a part of you and to incorporate it, and thereby harmonizing yourself and others as well. And if everyone were to do that, you would see greater harmony and less need for laws, and you would see less laws. You see the children of Israel, when they were going through, they had all these commandments, these rules and everything. And then in the New Testament, you see the apostles teaching about working from the heart. The intention for all the laws in Israel were to mold the hearts of the children of Israel, but they turned it into rote presentation and motions, and they lost the portion of it that they were supposed to engrave in themselves and become a part of. So he talks about also different, in book 9, he talks about the recommendations for things. So like, people will use silk, but it is prescribed to be linen. You bow, it is prescribed to bow before ascending, but people bow after ascending. linen oftentimes is associated with, well, in many cases is associated with a more humble caste. Bowing before rising is this idea that you're lowering yourself in humility before you can actually rise up. And it's by taking on that humility first that you truly become one where you're able to truly see and look up to the ideal. Because when you look at most everyone that's ideal and has the ideal personality, they're not someone who ascends after bowing. They are someone who bows themselves, and by bowing themselves in humility, they have ascended without really lifting themselves up. So it's almost symbolic in that as you bring yourself down in humility, not by beating yourself up, but by recognizing your true status, other people will lift you up. So like, people call Zigong a sage, but he would not call himself a sage. He does not see himself as on a level of sageliness. He sees himself as merely a servant. But everyone calls him a sage because of it. So he brings himself down, but not in a self-destructive way, but everyone else brings him up because of his humility and wisdom. So like, the wise are not confused, the good do not worry, and the courageous do not fear. So part of that is the wise are not confused. It's through that humility that you're able to learn the wisdom, and that wisdom will bring you up, just like Zigong has been brought up. You also need humility for that self-cultivation. And it talks about it that like sometimes it's hard. We don't improve as fast as we want to. But if you are moving earth a basket full at a time, then you're still moving you're still moving it. You're still moving earth. You're moving forward. It's just not as fast as others or yourself may want to. And we have to accept that with ourselves. There are things that I would like to improve faster in, but those take time. There are other things that I improve really fast at, and it kind of annoys me. And it's just the way life is. But it's being able to take those things in strides and understanding and figuring out how maybe we could work better at it and become better at improving. But that takes humility for the moment to be like, hey, this is where I am. And I have to be willing to accept that for now, but I'm not accepting it and that's all I'll do. I'm accepting it, but I'm willing to improve and become better. So, book 10. So, this one focuses a lot on his treatment of other people. So he had a very ritualistic treatment of other people. He had a very honored treatment of other people. So like with that humility previously in book 9, you treat others as your equal in essence, or as your higher ups per se. So you treat everyone better than you treat yourself because that's the way you would want to be treated. As mentioned, I can't remember in which one exactly. Do not treat others as you do not want to be treated. That is the reverse of treat others as you would want to be treated, which some people need to hear that. It's like, if you don't want to be treated this way, don't treat other people that way. And that's what some people have forgotten in society is like, well, you don't want to be treated this way, but you treat other people this way anyway, even though you don't want to be treated this way. And they either don't see that they're treating other people that way or whatnot. So like, for example, on my Discord, in my chat rooms, Gilded and what all. One of the rules is very simple. You treat others how you want to be treated. And if you act in a certain way, expect to be responded to in kind. But at the same time, I've tried to be better when people have treated me in a certain way. I've tried to be better and respond in a better way, in a way more congruent with the way I would want to be treated and respected. So when someone comes in disagreeing with me or tarnishing my character, I try and comport myself with them and try and listen to them and respect them, even though they may not be deserving of it. And that's kind of the thing that Zigong embodied, was treating others as you would truly want to be treated and honored and respected. And eventually that'll pour over so that it does reflect back. It just sometimes takes time. So let's see, 11. Okay, so here, let's see. So this, again, is... So it seems to focus more on the honor of it. Let's see, so he had that one, yeah. So actually, I like this portion in 11:22. So he gives different counsel to different people based on their needs. And that's one thing that I also think we seem to have forgotten, is that every different area has different needs. Every different person has different needs. And the way you respond to them is going to be different from person to person. You can't put a blanket thing out and expect everyone to respond in the same way, because they're all different. Regional differences have different needs. They have different weather patterns. They have different terrain and everything else. So the way you're going to grow... So if we use farming or growing as an example, you're going to grow certain foods in certain areas because of the general climate. So you're going to grow more tropical foods on coastlines versus in mainland. You're going to grow, and even when you're in the center of a mainland, you're going to start the same foods at different times based on the locality where you're at, based on the weather pattern change, because it may get warmer in certain areas sooner than other areas. So that's why with his counsel, he applies it differently to each of the different people because of their needs and their personalities and their tendencies. So you can look at everyone as a blank slate, but at the same time, you need to be able to discern their needs and what they really need in order to give them the proper counsel. You can't just apply a blank slate counsel to everyone. So, Book 12 focuses a little bit more on refinement. And this is, again, that restraining portion. Whether as a governor or as an individual, it's through that refinement that you become better. So you may have a few good virtues, but by refining and focusing those virtues, you naturally incorporate other virtues, but also you become better in the sight of people. So, we'll skip to book 14. So here he has someone asking, hey, how do I organize my men in order to fight a battle? It's like, hey, I don't know that. You see a number of times where he pushes off counsel because it's like, I'm not the one to ask about that. That's not my thing. You ask someone that's more versed in that thing or that works in that thing, a farmer, a gardener, or a war strategist, and they will tell you how to better do that job. Okay, that was in book 15 that he mentioned it. By nature, people are similar. They diverge as a result of practice. We see that in the world today so much. By seeing the different practices and the way the world has corrupted, that it's that practice and that growing. They start out pure and then they start to diverge. And by not keeping to the rights or not keeping to your values, you lose your way. So, and there's in 18, you see the story of the old man that helped Zilu. It's be willing to help others. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is like, you don't need the recognition. You can see the old man. He like disappeared out of nowhere, even though he would have been recognized for it. You don't need the recognition, and some people don't even want that, and that's okay. It's just be willing to serve those around you, treat others as you would like to be treated, and good things will come. So, again, this book, there's a lot of portions where it talks about questioning, learning from thinking and deeply digging into what you learn. I can't do everything of that, but, well, for someone else, that is an individual thing that you have to do yourself. And that's what, when you study, be willing to dig deep and really learn. So, and then accepting fate. I mean, there are many lines that are drawn. If you become the best person you can and you are humble, you'll accept what comes your way. It basically is the path of come what may and love it. You just try your best to do what you can, be your best self, be virtuous. Things will happen. Even a gentleman hits hard times, and it's only natural. It's the world that we live in, but as we take it and joyfully ride with it, it'll all be okay in the end. Anyway, I need to hurry up and slap all this together, shower up, and pack my bags, and hopefully I can get this uploaded before I leave. But I will see you all. Well, check out the Discord. I do have a subscribe star, so like for those that are using this and listening to these, otherwise for the book club stuff, it is appreciated, and it would give me more time so that I'm not stressing so much about like fitting it all in. So have a good one, and yeah, you can scream at me about like why I'm stupid and like that kind of thing. So yeah,